What's up? Long time no see, everybody. This is GI Rail Fan. Welcome back to my channel. As you can guess from the title of this video, we're going to be talking about the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train crash of 1918, and we're also going to be going over some very particular details of this crash. And this video will not be for the casual viewer of this channel. The topics that I talk about are things that were glossed over or not really flushed out in the wider narrative of the story. If my audio sounds a little wonky, I apologize. I'm kind of MacGyvering this together. I'm going through some things and don't really have my equipment properly set up. Is one of the reasons why I haven't been recording videos as of late. But I'm going to try it out and see how it comes out. One of the things that interests me with the circus train crash is the people who were connected to the outside world during the time of the crash. These people would have been men that were manning the railroad towers, that were, the railroad watchtower operators that were on duty the night of the crash. These guys were highly important that night. Locomotives were not equipped with radio technology yet. There was no CTC, there was no DTC. Railroads didn't even begin to use train radio on a wide scale, at least, until after World War II. That meant crews on trains had to employ the use of analog methods to relay information to one another. That being hand signals, lamp signals. These signals were used while trains were in motion out on the main lines, and also when trains were pulling or pulled into stations or in rail yards. The only way crews could receive information from the outside world of the train without use of radio was by these tower operators. Now, they handled the distribution of train orders, which were pieces of paper that gave train crews operating instructions or track warrants. Tower men would hang the paper instructions on an apparatus called a fork or a hoop. This would be placed on top of a permanently mounted pole and positioned to be at a particular height and distance from a locomotive's cab window, where all that was needed was for a hand to reach out and snatch the paper orders off of the fork without stopping the train. Some poles had double forks in which the top fork would hold orders for the engineer and the bottom fork will hold orders for the conductor in the caboose. It would be tower operators who would be connected to the outside world. They employed the use of telegraphs, which were manned by a railroad operator. They had telephones as well. Tower operators would also control the flow of traffic in and out of rail yards, on and off of sidings, switching between tracks, directly observing passing trains, ensuring that switch orders were followed, semaphore signal operations at junctions, regulating street crossing traffic gates. They were responsible for maintaining proper sequence of movement, scheduling arrival and departure times, and could reroute train traffic in case of an emergency or in case of track maintenance. And on rare occasions, sometimes these jobs would be given to women, especially in the old days. There were other responsibilities, but the bottom line is that their jobs were highly important. Most were well paid, yet most of their responsibilities were slowly phased out with the advent of technology as the decades passed. Now most operations are handled by a central control facility utilizing something called CTC, centralized traffic control. These operators and dispatchers can control the movement of trains, signals, and other things from miles away by use of radio signals, satellites, and track sensors. Back in 1918, it was just 2 or 3 grunts in a wooden box pushing buttons and pulling levers. Safe operation solely depended on their skills and their competence. The tower operators at Ivanhoe and Tollerston were such people. We're going to zoom in here, and this location would be the general vicinity of Tollerston Tower. This would have been the location of the tower. It's geo-mapped, so this is pretty damn near close to where the actual tower was, all right? And we're going to go to Ivanhoe Tower. which is also a place that was geo-mapped. We'll wait for the internet to clear up over here. I haven't really. Okay, so this area here, see what this box is? This is the general vicinity of where Ivanhoe Tower stood. It is geo-mapped, so basically within, these parameters of the yellow line is where the walls of the tower was. Now, both towers were two-story structures. The Ivanhoe Tower here sat on the EJ&E main line. This tower was an EJ&E tower. All right. And back to the east at Tolleson Tower. Tolleson Tower was a Michigan Central Tower. So the Michigan Central main line ran east and west. So east would be over here to the right side of the screen, and west would be where Ivanhoe is, Ivanhoe Junction. All right. Now the municipal borders between Gary, Indiana, and Hammond are at Klein Avenue. They're pretty much, for the most part, spaced directly in between the highway of 912. So the general dividing line between these two municipalities is the center of Klein Avenue. That takes care of that. I'm not going to go over that anymore. All right. The towers. So the night of the crash, it is only reported that there was one person on duty at Tolleson Tower, the interlocking between Michigan Central and Pennsylvania Railroad. Michigan Central, as I stated before, running east and west, and the Pennsylvania Railroad crossing here, northwest, southeast at an angle. All right, and back in 1918, this turnoff did not exist, and both this turnoff up here didn't exist either, and both of the main lines were double tracked, and there were some sidings here from Michigan Central on both sides of the interlocking. The accident report listed that Tolleson Tower's operator was named Fifield, but failed to mention his first name or his initials. They usually went by initials back then. With the use of some creative researching, I found someone who fit the bill. The person's name, I believe, is E. Fifield, or Edward Irving Fifield. And you can see here where I found a registration card for him. This Fifield is the only Fifield I could find who worked on the railroad and was alive and was at the proper age during the time of the crash. Mr. Ed Fifield was born in 1888 in Porter County, Indiana. I don't know when he began to work for Michigan Central, but he was employed at that company and living in Tolleson by at least 1917. In old city directories, he is listed as being a Michigan Central telegraph operator, which will still fall in line of being working for a railroad tower, operating the telegraphs in the tower. Even though the Michigan Central owned the railroad tower at Tolleson, Pennsylvania Railroad and Michigan Central shared maintenance duty, okay? Michigan Central controlled and maintained the tower, signals, and the machinery, and all the mechanisms that made this interlocking work. And Pennsy maintained the streets and the crossing gates, all right? They had a contract that was agreed to August 14th, 1907. It is unknown what the arrangement was prior to this date. I think I can show this to you. Back in the day, there was a number of streets that used to cross the Michigan Central main line here within Tolleson, and these streets no longer exist. Used to be, if you look at some partial information and also looking at the clues on the map. So right here used to be a street. This was Garfield Street. I'll light up the roads for you real quick. All right, so you can see here that this says Garfield Street. This street used to cross like so, north and south. And also you can see Cleveland Street here was also a street that crossed north and south. And these streets no longer cross the main lines. I'm not really sure exactly when these streets stopped becoming important, or when the railroad decided they didn't want to be responsible for maintaining these crossings. But I have a suspicion that Garfield Street was eliminated in the mid to late 60s when this turnoff was constructed by Penn Central. As I stated before, with Fifield as a telegraph operator, he was responsible for receiving train orders from a centralized dispatcher. He was to report back to the centralized dispatcher the movements of the train. And the dispatcher and Fifield will communicate using a telegraph with Morse code. He will write the orders on paper and hand it off to crews on the trains that passed his tower. He would log the train arrival times, which was extremely important, being that without properly logging arrival times, trains could end up on the same track and run into each other. So that was the job of Fifield at Untitled Tower. So now we're going to leave Untitled for a moment, and we're going to go back to Ivanhoe. Here we are back at Ivanhoe interlocking. This is where the EJ&E main line, which runs north and south, crosses the Michigan Central main line here, which runs east and west. It also crosses the Gary and Western, which is here, which also runs east and west. On the night of the crash, newspapers reported that there was a second man on duty that night, and this person being the Ivanhoe Tower operator. The man's name was Hamilton Remington Forbes. Hamilton Remington Forbes. Okay, now here I have a document here containing Hamilton Forbes' name. You see that he is the head of his household. He has a wife, daughter, son, blah. All right, so I was able to find out that Mr. Forbes was also born in Porter County in 1899. That would make him 10 years younger than Fifield on the night of the accident. Mr. Forbes, he got busy early in his life. He married a girl his age at age 14, and by 1917, he was a father of 3. He had a second family member who worked as an EJ&E mechanic, and a third who was an EJ&E engineer. These people probably bled EJ&E orange if you were to cut them. In 1918, Hamilton's address is listed as 858 Fairbanks Street, which is interesting because that's roughly 540 yards from Ivanhoe Tower, depending on where you start measuring. But more interestingly, his house was right around the corner from the crash site the night of the accident, right off of the Gary and Interurban Electric Streetcar line on 9th Avenue. And I also found old directories that showed that Hamilton Forbes was listed as an EJ&E tower operator around the same time of the crash. Outside of Hamilton Forbes placing blame on Alonzo Sargent in the newspapers, there is nothing else reported about Mr. Forbes. But we'll get back to Mr. Forbes in a minute. Neither tower operator, either Fifield or Forbes, could see each other's signals, nor could they see any train approaching from each other's area of governance because of a curve in the line. All right, so y'all see how the line curves here. So in other words, eastbound trains were telephoned to Untitled Tower by Ivanhoe Tower, and vice versa for westbound trains. So you have Untitled Tower here with Mr. Fifield's name lit up, and then you have Ivanhoe Tower here with Mr. Forbes' name lit up. I don't know why this is not where it's supposed to be, but so now you know the names of the tower operators who were on duty that night, the night of the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train accident. All right. Because they couldn't see each other's signals or each other's trains, they had to rely on direct communication with each other in order to ensure that trains passed them by in this area safely. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the night of the crash. The night of the crash, Untitled Tower's operator Ed Fifield called Ivanhoe Tower's operator Hamilton Forbes, announcing the approach of the second part of the circus train, noting the time as 3:44 a.m. From Fifield's position, in the tower. He would have a perfect view of the south side of the train because the tower sat on the south side of the main line. He told investigators that he did not see a burning hot box, and that is not an abnormal thing because the hot box was on the north side of the train, so there would have been no way for him to see the hot box burning, even if it was burning when it passed by Tolliston Tower. When the troop train passed him, which would have been the train that crashed into the circus train, Fifield noted its approach to his tower at 5:52 a.m. He telephoned Forbes and announced the arrival of the troop train, but Forbes was having an issue. Forbes began to question Fifield about proper lever settings. Now, what was going on, from what I was able to gather from bits and pieces of information from all sorts of media, was that the circus train and the troop train were not the only trains in the vicinity, and were not the only trains that were, especially not the only trains that were around Ivanhoe. There were a number of trains in the area. There was a train that was waiting for the circus train to cross that was parked somewhere up here. There was also another train coming from the west going east on the Michigan Central main line. There was a train approaching. Forbes knew about these two trains, of course. And also there was the circus train that was parked on the siding here. And then there were two other troop trains that were scheduled to come by. The first troop train is the troop train that was involved in the accident. Now, it was not stated, but I am quite certain that Forbes would have informed Fifield that the circus train had stopped on the westbound main line. But he wouldn't have known why this train stopped. Alright? This is because from his position in Ivanhoe Tower, he also will only be able to see the south side of the train, of the circus train, because his tower is on the south side of the Michigan Central main line. He would not have been able to see the burning journal box. As I stated before, the burning journal box was on the north side of the train. This comes full circle about the radio. There were no radio communications, so neither the engineer of the circus train or the conductor of the circus train could inform Forbes about the burning hot box. Forbes' conversation with Fifield about proper lever settings would fit if this is the case. And I'm certain Forbes would have known about the troop train, and I could imagine that his confusion about how to set the levers properly was a very urgent conversation. So, according to what I've just said, the conversation that Mr. Forbes had with Mr. Fifield that night about proper lever setting was a matter of great importance, because you don't want trains running into each other. Nobody knew that the troop train was so close behind. But in a professionally operating railroad system, if everything was working correctly and everybody was doing what they were supposed to do, there really shouldn't have been too much of an issue. All the trains would have been out of each other's way, even if they were shaving it really close. There's something else. As I stated before, there were two troop trains that night. The first troop train is the one that was involved in the crash with the circus train. The second troop train was not involved in the crash, but assisted in the rescue effort after the crash. The presence of the second troop train so close to the crash site is kind of scary. Alright, the second troop train arrived like almost less than 5 minutes after the crash happened. So what I mean by that is Fifield noted the approach of Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train at 3:44 a.m. Then the troop train passed him. They're all going west. The troop train passed him at 3:52 a.m. Alright, that was the first part of the troop train that crashed into the circus train. Now the second part of the troop train, which was a whole separate train, Fifield recorded the time of arrival for the second troop train at 4:06 a.m. The crash happened at either 3:59 a.m. or 4 a.m. on the dot. Why was the second troop train allowed to pass Tolliston Tower at 4:06 if the crash happened at 3:59 or 4 o'clock in the morning? The answer to that question is it was because Fifield didn't receive the phone call about the crash until 4:06. So right when the second troop train passed Fifield at Untitled Tower, he almost immediately received a phone call from Ivanhoe about the crash. This is the reason why the second troop train was allowed to pass Untitled Tower during the time of the accident. And this is the reason why the second part of that troop train had to be stopped by the crew from the first part of the troop train. All right. How about this question? All right. Now, if we go with what Alonzo Sargent said, he was supposedly awake when his train passed Tolliston. The circus train came to a complete stop at 3:55 a.m. at Ivanhoe. Yet Forbes, theoretically, could have prevented the second troop train from passing Tolliston by informing Fifield about the circus train being stopped on the main line in his area of governance. Now, I don't know where the signals were back then east of Tolliston, but Michigan Central had a passenger depot and a freight station near where 10th in Massachusetts is now. I'm going to go ahead and light up that area for the map so you can see. All right. So the main line for Michigan Central goes east here, and it passes this area here. This is where Michigan Central had its depot and its freight station. In theory, Fifield could have called there and informed the operators about the train blocking the main and stopped the second troop train here around the time of the crash. But instead, the second troop train was allowed to enter the city. And if it wasn't for the quick thinking of the first troop train's brakeman, the second troop train would not have been flagged down in time to prevent a second crash that night. So we kind of narrowly avoided a larger disaster. Very narrowly. All right. And if you are confused, I'm going to explain just a little bit more. All right. Boom. The crash happens. Okay. Fifield at Tolliston is not informed of the crash by Forbes until about 5 minutes after it happens. At that same time, the second troop train is passing Fifield at Untitled Tower. So the crash happens here, and the trains are still moving on the main line, and Fifield has no idea that there is a crash until he is informed by Forbes 5 minutes after it happens. All right. So what I'm saying is that if Forbes would have called Michigan Central about the stopped train on the main line as it occurred, it could have been possible to stop that second troop train from passing Tolliston. He wouldn't have been able to stop the crash from happening because at that time the troop train had already passed Fifield and was on the way to Ivanhoe. But the second troop train would have been about 5 minutes behind the first. It could have been possible that the second troop train could have stopped here at the Michigan Central Depot and not have been in close proximity to the crash site at all. That's all that I'm saying. Now, what is surprising to me is that Forbes was the only man out of everybody who could literally see everything as it unfolded. Hamilton Forbes, the guy with 3 kids who lived around the corner from the crash site, he would have been able to see the whole incident as it unfolded from his perch here at the tower. All right. This guy's point of view of the crash is not documented at all. It's possible that not only did he see the crash happen, but his family heard the crash happen from their house and would have been only minutes away from the calamity. As I stated before, they stayed right on Fairbank Street, which is no longer a street anymore, but there are still some homes that are standing there that I'm going to pull up for you guys. So you can see kind of what the house looked like, which is kind of cool. But this is the street that they would have lived on. And they would have been right down just a block away from the actual crash site, which was right here. All right, so Forbes Tower was here. His house was down here. And the crash site was right here. So the entire Forbes family, in theory, could have all been present at the crash site as it happened. And I think that's fucking amazing. I do not know how long Hamilton Forbes had been working for EJ&E as a tower operator. He was working as a tower man as early as 1917 when he was 19 years old. He was 20 years old at the time of the accident, 10 years younger than Fifield at Untitled Tower. Okay. I assume, being that he had multiple family members who also worked for EJ&E, presumably they were all older than he was. And in my mind, I'm thinking he probably was able to get this tower operator job because of his family members, because of his family name. Secondly, he lived right around the corner from Ivanhoe Tower. I'm assuming that other Forbes family members either lived with him based on documents I've seen, or they were his neighbors on that same street. There were other EJ&E workmen who lived on Fairbanks Street at the time of the crash. There were even two other people who stayed on Fairbanks Street. Fairbanks Street that were also employed as tower operators at the time of the crash. They were brothers, William and David Sweet. But their names aren't mentioned in any literature about the Hagenbeck crash at all. We don't know what their involvement could have been. We don't know if they were a part of the first response. We don't know. I also have another little known factoid for you guys. Saturday, February 24th, 1918, there was a coal train accident that occurred. No one was killed, but the circumstances of this crash has a few peculiar similarities to the Hagenbeck-Wallace crash that occurred 4 months later. A westbound Michigan Central coal train derailed. It spilled several thousand tons of coal all over the place. The wreckage blocked the main line. The same thing that happened when the circus train accident occurred. This crash happened at 3 a.m., nearly around the same time as the circus train accident, right here at Ivanhoe in Shilaki. That was February 24th, 1918. Could young Forbes have been on duty that night as well? I don't know. It's just something for you to think about. This is GI Rail Fan.